Hello everyone, this is Michael Michailidis from Ancient Greece Revisited, and I was recently interviewed for a second time in a great podcast called The Ripple Effect, hosted by one Ricky Verandas, obviously link in the description below. And he was kind enough to invite me for a second time over, and we talked about various things, obviously from what you know of this channel. The conversation kind of led to philosophy and to the state of the modern world in conjunction and in contrast to the ancient world, which is the main theme of our show. And I've isolated a little snippet for you, as I've done in previous interviews, because I think it's pretty valuable. These are things that I could not have written or just improvised. These are things that very much in the tradition of Socrates. It's the type of knowledge that kind of comes out of you if you're speaking to someone who can bring it forth. And it seems that this someone was Ricky in this interview. And the main theme was about the boundaries, the mental boundaries that modern culture has put on us. We think that we're thinking freely, and we think that we're thinking without bias, and that could be true on a personal level. In other words, perhaps someone who says I'm a free-thinking person might be 100% honest with themselves and with their audience. But I believe that this thinking always happens within the context of the dominant culture, of the dominant theories. Every culture has a metaphysics, and yes, that includes our modern scientific culture. Science has a metaphysics, which a lot of people deny, because they think of metaphysics as belief in the supernatural. But that's not what metaphysics is. Metaphysics is the ultimate question of what it means for something to exist in a nutshell. And different cultures give a different meaning, and different philosophers, the answer of a modern scientist and the answer of someone like Martin Heidegger are very different. And what came out in this interview was that the context of our culture has given a very specific answer rather, as to what it means for something to exist. And we think that we're breaking these boxes and we're thinking very radical thoughts, but ultimately, as long as they rest on these basic assumptions, they're not that radical. And the conversation that you're about to watch kind of segues from another topic that's kind of dear to our heart, which is psychedelics and the psychedelic experience. And the reason being that the psychedelic experience for many people is not only a mind-opening, but in the context of what I just said, it's a context-breaking, a box-breaking experience where the mind is released from all the confines of culture. But ultimately, you come down from this trip, from this mystical experience. You come down and you translate it, and invariably, when people translate this mystical experience, they translate it back within the confines of their culture. So perhaps psychedelics do take you out of some box, but very quickly you're back in that box, and you translate it, and you end up talking about, neurotransmitters and chemical compounds that interact, and you think you're being very spiritual because you think that ultimately you have found almost like a chemical basis for the mystical experience. But it seems to me that the ultimate winner in this transformation from experience to explanation, the ultimate winner is still the modern scientific culture that we're in. So it's not as spiritual, in other words. The way psychedelics are translated, it's not as spiritual as people think. And I think this and a few other things came out in this conversation that you're about to watch. As always, thank you very much. Like, subscribe to our channel. You're very welcome. And we do feed of the support, of the kindness of strangers. So we have a Patreon link down below, and any generous contribution is more than welcome. So enjoy this conversation, and we'll see you in the next episodes.
So, for instance, to go to the other extreme of spirituality, we can talk about psychedelics. And lots of people are finding spiritual experiences through psychedelics. And it was Carl Jung who said that there's no greater tool to convince someone of the materialist view than psychedelics, because psychedelics are a chemical compound, there's no doubt about that, and they can induce something that, at least when experienced, is experienced as a spiritual epiphany. So you take a chemical, you can write it on the blackboard, a specific chemical, you can draw it, that's what it is, we know what it is, very simple or not so simple. You take it and you see God, or you claim to do that. And Carl Jung, the great psychoanalyst, correctly, in my opinion, he said that that's not a tool to get you out of that box of modernity and of the post-enlightenment. It's actually a tool that gets you right in, because it confirms that everything is material, everything is just chemical reactions happening in your brain, and there's nothing more. You know,
But
so and you see.
I was going to say, but
Please.
couldn't it also do the opposite? Because you could also argue that what it does, it reminds you that everything's perception. So even the external reality, there's like external reality and the internal reality. The external reality is all based on perception. So the external reality is very subjective. It's not as concrete and black and white as many modern, scientists and modern day, they would say everything's just a material thing, and you can't argue that this is truth and this is real and that is not real. And so, couldn't you see it from that perspective also?
Well, again, you just bumped into that horizon, because you said, unquestionably, you said there's an external reality and there's an internal reality, and that's pure Descartes. And what connects the two?
But
Mathematics. The only connection, objective connection you can draw, is mathematics, because what you see can be a total illusion. But you go out and you count, there's 3 chairs in front of me, and I can close my eyes and imagine another one, and I can say 3 + 1 is 4, and I can stand, and there's one sitting, and 1, 2, 3, 4, I confirm that. So mathematics is what connects the truth in our heads with the outside world. And there's an objective, and modern science and the modern world was built on this measurable quality as being the only reliable quality, right? So, and that again is a diminishment, you see. So I think there is, I think, again, to go back to Leo Strauss, he suggested the effort of Western civilization being at this end time, being at a place that it cannot think itself out of the troubles it got into. It has all the material wealth, and it has all these weird problems. It has this internal strife, internal polarization, which is growing, whether it's the pandemic or Donald Trump or whoever. People are just forced to pick sides and hate each other. There's this internal polarization. There's all sorts of weird censorship, which might sound funny when you're outside, but I know people that have been punished severely for, quote unquote, saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. And these are pretty stupid problems, but they are real, and they're telling of something, and they're telling that we somehow reached a cultural dead end, and we need to kind of think our way out of it. But what Strauss was saying is just kind of bracketing that and say, look, our culture, this Western culture, it started from somewhere, and it started around that time we call the Enlightenment. And what we're living, it's just an offshoot, just an outgrowth of that. So if at the end of that process we find ourselves in a bad place, the point is to try and peek behind it, just try and look, just try to think behind this horizon, which is something that I'm trying to do in my show, Ancient Greece Revisited, trying to almost think like an ancient Greek, for the sake of thinking at least myself out of these problems, you see. So it's a greater effort than taking, let's say, psychedelics or going to the church, because ultimately all these experiences, even if they're as intense as something like spiritual epiphany, when you come down from this epiphany, you are going to reinterpret it in the mental structures that have been given to you by your culture, and you think you peel one layer, but there's another deeper layer behind. You're just going back in time. So we went to, like in this conversation, we started from a world of entertainment and distractions, blah blah. What's the point? What's the solution? Maybe a spiritual experience, maybe psychedelics, and that shows you that your reality is subjective. And all we've done is go from today to Descartes, and we're just like goldfish swimming in this little box. We managed to go back there, and then we went back. What can we do? We take psychedelics, or we go to the church, and we go all the way back to Descartes and back here and back in the beginning of the Enlightenment and back, because we can't break this barrier of that watershed moment, as it was called, in that 16th century. Something happened, and European consciousness changed radically, and it changed on all levels, which I find fascinating.
Now, that's so interesting. That every time I talk to you or listen to you talk, you always say something that just like blows my mind, and I need like hours to just process. So I'm gonna definitely have to process what you just said. It's so true. You do just end up going back to the same place.